We made this.
Hi Ian, it's Matt. Just to let you know that I'm due to arrive back onto podcasting about adventure games very soon. Can't wait to podcast about Gone Home with you. Don't worry, I'll set up the Zencaster session, so don't bother setting up. Like, really, seriously, you don't have to. Okay, see you soon.
Hello and welcome to Ask Us About Loom, a podcast covering adventure games of all kinds, including point-and-click adventure games, interactive fiction, walking simulators, and, any other kind of game that can be called adventure games. I'm your host, Matt Latham, and it's been around 2 years since the last episode aired. And, if anyone still has us in your feed, then, hi, I admire your commitment. I'm surprised you haven't unsubscribed yet. Yeah, my name's Matt Latham, and this is the podcast where I'm going to be talking to people about adventure games. Now, I'm not alone. I have a guest with me who's not Tiny Black, and I'll explain a bit more into why that is a bit later on. But first, let's showcase perhaps a better guest than Tony, Mr. Ian Buckley. Ian, how are you doing?
Hey, Matt. I'm doing well. It's good to be here. I'm very excited to talk about Gone Home with you.
Yeah, the Ask Us About Loom has always been something that I've always kind of wanted to do, and I think just kind of fell on the wayside a bit. The original idea of the podcast was for me and Tony, who at the time lived about 15 minutes down the road from me, an opportunity to meet up like once a month to talk about a kind of niche interest, an interest that we had, and for him to basically try and get into more adventure games or games that I'll suggest to him. And it was an excuse for us to kind of meet up every so often. Now, you podcast with Tony on a Severance podcast, Illumination Above All, and one thing that we can both realise about Tony is that he's extremely quote-unquote busy, either writing or doing podcasts, and he also moved a couple of 100 miles down the road from me, so that put a kibosh on the podcast for a while. But I thought, you know what, I've always kind of wanted to go and to speak to other people about other games as well, so not just Tony. And yeah, I'll do that soon. And then before you know it, a couple of years have passed, and I'm like, crap, I'm supposed to be doing this podcast, or I want to do this podcast. And I think, you know what, my editing of my other podcast is I've gotten to a place where I find it a lot easier to edit with some software. Maybe I can get back into this. And so we're here. And Ian, I think you've always been extremely excited whenever the subject of this podcast come up, and it was like, oh, if you're doing it, let me on. And it's quite an infectious enthusiasm, which I think helps spur me on a bit. But before we go on to Gone Home, what's your kind of relationship with adventure games in general? Are you like a massive fan of them?
So probably wouldn't be fair to call me a massive fan or super fan. I think that label probably applies more aptly to you. But I certainly am a fan, and I'm a fan going basically to my earliest kind of gaming memories. I think my actual first adventure game might have been Loom.
Okay.
It was either Loom or Monkey Island 2. But right around that same age, that same era, I discovered the LucasArts games. So Monkey Island 2, Monkey Island 1, Loom, of course, the Indiana Jones adventure games, Last Crusade and Fate of Atlantis, and a couple of others after that. Not, I didn't play The Dig, but I watched a friend play it. I did pick up The Longest Journey when that came out, kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s. I kind of pick up the occasional adventure game here and there, the Telltale games. I got into those, for a while. Got into, this is more of sort of on the horror end of things, but, the Frictional Games, studio that did like the Amnesia games and, Soma, games like the Stanley Parable, big fan of that game. And a couple of other, kind of quote-unquote walking sim games like Dear Esther, which was also like Stanley Parable, started out as a mod for Half-Life, and games like Gone Home, this game, and I played a bit of the follow-up game Tacoma. So that's pretty much. I'm sure I'm forgetting some big ones in there, but that's a basic overview of kind of the ones that stand out in my history, to me. And that's kind of my adventure gaming history.
So are you much a gamer at all? So are you a big gamer? Or?
Very much, yeah. Both PC and less console these days. I do still dip into console games occasionally, but I don't have as much time as I used to. I primarily game on PC, a lot of RPGs, adventure games like we've been talking about. But I'd say the biggest genre is strategy and RPG for me these days.
Yeah, okay. Because I know you've been quite a few times we've got like a kind of hidden staff only. We made this Discord, and whenever I've mentioned either playing or looking at some kind of games, you've either expressed interest or said, "Oh, I think I've played that." And so yeah, you're kind of one of the first people to react about any point and click or adventure games and stuff.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I think as well, I think in order to kind of carry on, I think there's also kind of a few other games I think you've already kind of either claimed, so listeners can expect you back at some point to talk about other games that we've said want to talk about.
Yeah, Loom I would love to talk about. That was, it is not as complex mechanically or narratively as the adventure games that followed it, but it is one of those adventure games because it was so early for me. It's pretty, there's a lot of nostalgia tied up in that game for me, so I'd love to talk about that game. I do think it's a good game. It definitely stands up on its own. It's not, I probably wouldn't call it a masterpiece like I'd call Fate of Atlantis or the Monkey Island games, but it's a really good game that I have a lot of affection for.
Yeah, and I still have to play more than half an hour of it, but that's a whole other question because we're talking about the game and stuff. But again, featuring the podcast as well. I do know that Tony is at some point wanting to come back. He definitely wants to come back and finish the Monkey Island games. And I know we've chatted whether it might be a kind of a three-headed monkey of a conversation with yourself as well at times.
Yeah, and now we've actually got a new one to look forward to, which I never thought I'd be saying that again.
A Ron Gilbert created.
I never thought I'd be saying that again.
Yeah.
But I honestly had kind of given up hope for the franchise being revived. Nothing stays dead anymore. No franchise stays dead anymore. If there's an opportunity to cash in on a recognizable name, then someone eventually would do it. But I really didn't expect this.
I think perhaps there's probably the potential as well, and I've mused this, that some games that I perhaps haven't played, you might occasionally have the odd episode where I'm not on it. So I know we've mused about that a few times. Because I know Tony really wants to talk about Fate of Atlantis. And he and a mutual friend once, I think, at least worked on a kind of spec script on it. But I'm not going to spoil. But that's all I'm going to say about that, because we're going to be talking about Gone Home, which is a 2013 first-person exploration walking simulator / video game published and developed by the Fulbright Company that was released on August 2013. So almost 9 years ago, 9 years to the month of recording. First released on Windows, OS X and Linux, and then followed console releases quite a few years later for PS4 and Xbox One on 2016, and it went on to Switch on September 2018 and iOS on December 2018. For listeners who haven't played this before, what's going to happen is myself and Ian are going to have a quick chat, like a brief overview, but we're not going to get spoilery. So we're going to have a brief overview of what the game is, what it's slightly about, and then we're going to give you a warning before we go to spoiler territory. But the aim being that if you want to, if the sound of the game sounds like, oh, that might be interesting, you have the option to we'll give you a cut-off point and to go and play it and then continue with the podcast. That's basically how the podcast and future episodes will go anyway. So we're going to give you a spoiler warning beforehand. So if you are listening and wanting to play, you can go and play it without fear of being spoiled by us. Now, Gone Home is set in the year 1995, and you are in the footsteps of a young woman returning from overseas to a family home to find that her family's gone, absent, and the house is practically empty. And she basically walks around the house, picking up things, trying to figure out what's going on and explore the home. as you're exploring, you begin to hear journal entries from her younger sister, and the gaps of the mystery of where she is, where her parents are, gradually become revealed. The game is created by the Fulbright team, made from people who worked on Bioshock 2 Minerva's Den, which I've not played. The only Bioshock game I played is Bioshock Infinite. Are you a fan or play the Bioshock games, Ian?
I dabbled in each of them a little bit. I never played any of them to completion. I enjoyed my time with them. I just never finished them.
Okay, so, but you can, but I think so. But having that, so I think I've played Bioshock Infinite.
Mm-hmm.
So I've not played any of the others.
Infinite was the one that I played the most of.
Yeah.
I did really enjoy that.
Yeah, and I can kind of see the exploration bit from that, because there's a lot of kind of gathering information and picking up stuff, but there's a lot more direct interaction and there's action in that. But you can kind of see how the exploration of a certain environment was set up that could be done for here.
Yeah, and storytelling through little details about the world around you, like non-verbal storytelling, just by the objects that inhabit an environment.
Gone Home was critically praised at release. Several outlets used the game as an example as video games as art, as its non-standard gameplay format demonstrates progression in the video game industry into more artistic forms. A conversation we're going to go a bit later on is the kind of debate that followed about whether it's a game or not, and led to the term walking simulators that was meant to be a derogatory term, but has since become a actual descriptor for a new kind of subgenre of adventure game. So that's pretty much it. I think the gameplay is you just walking around the house picking up objects, reading notes and just piecing up together a story that's happening, and you'll begin to find out what's coming through. What's going to happen now? I'm going to press the doorbell and no one's going to answer the door. I'm going to have to find a key underneath Christmas duck and open the door into our spoiler chat. So, if you've not played it and it sounds like it's something you might want to play, press stop, go and play it and come back now. Okay, Ian, so your general thoughts on Gone Home?
So I played this back when it first came out on PC. At the time, I hadn't heard anything specific about it other than it was a good new indie game worth playing. I heard good things from people, other gamer friends of mine whose opinions I respected, so I bought it and played it. As you're aware, it doesn't take very long to play, but it was a pretty impactful experience. I really enjoyed it first time, and I really enjoyed my playthrough again, which I just finished the other day. I always recommend this game to people, and having just had the chance to revisit it for the first time in, like you said, about 9 years, I'd still recommend it to people.
I think I played it very soon after it came out. I kind of remember seeing like YouTube videos of the trailer where you just see someone walking around with a tape playing through, in heavens to Betsy starts playing through a cassette player, and just walking through and stuff, and just reading about this kind of exploration game, and I'm like, oh, this sounds like quite interesting, and then played it, and then I think I sat through it and played it in one night. It took me about 3 hours because I ended up looking through a lot of stuff. I got hooked onto it. I remember finishing it about 11:30, 12:15, and I'll get into a bit. And by that point, I was slightly tired, wired, and just like a bit not unsettled. But I'll get into into that. But as like a single sitting game, it kind of hooked me in and kind of just drew me in with how I was able to kind of craft this own like narrative around the game and stuff. So, so how did you find like the initial gameplay when you first started playing it?
Good. I played it as I think it was intended to be played on, late at night, like yourself. in one sitting, and I think I can't remember what specifics I had heard about the game going into it, based on the setting that you arrive in. You arrive on a dark and stormy night to a dark and empty house. There are randomized house noises, lightning and thunder, a couple of misdirects along the way that, I might have initially been expecting a little bit more of a horror experience. I certainly had for the first probably 30 minutes to an hour of playing this game the first time through, that anxiety of, walking through this dark house with all the lights off, and there's strange noises, and you don't know for sure, is this house haunted? There's allusions to it being a psycho house, and there are, like I mentioned, multiple misdirections along the way. A bathtub with what seems to be bloody stains in it until you realize that it's hair dye. The sound design that I mentioned, the random noises and lightning and thunder that sometimes occur at moments when you least expect them, and you do get some jolts, even though you're not being pursued by an entity or anything. There is an atmosphere in this game which does lend that feeling of dread that you sometimes get out of a proper horror game.
Yeah, there's a purposeful subversion of horror tropes in this. Now, I'm not really a horror game fan. I'm not really a horror film fan. Any kind of game that's horror based is usually a draw to me because it's got a stronger story rather than the jump scare stuff. Case in point, the storytelling kind of aspect of Until Dawn, which basically meant you could play a slasher film and people could die and survive and stuff. I had to go and check when the jump scares were before I could start playing it, so I knew what to expect. Yeah, but I quite like the fact that there's no jump scares, but it kind of is meant to kind of give that feel to it. So those noises, the lights flickering, but very, very early on. If you're exploring, I think it's the first or second room. Naturally, I think most gamers will probably go to the downstairs bit, like I did. There's a room which I think is the character's dad's study, and there's a letter talking of a house survey which mentions about issues with some of the walls, some of the piping, and particularly the electronics. And it mentions on this survey saying you'll need to get the house rewired, but you will get intermittent flickering. So all the kind of tropes, the atmospheric tropes, like the flickering, like the noises that aren't outside, are all kind of explained in universe. And so if you didn't, but again, it's one of those things that's kind of, you have to kind of look for. So if you just going through, just not looking at every single thing, just looking at the things that stand out to progress the story that's being told, you're going to miss that. So you're going to be you're going to be thinking, oh, what's going on here? There's still flickering, there's still kind of weird noises and stuff, without knowing that context to it. But I do appreciate that the game says, yes, all this is happening, but we have a reason for it. And I'm just finding it very clever how that's done.
Yeah, everything's logically consistent. Even the little misdirects, like I mentioned, the stains in the bathtub. You get what the situation actually is. As soon as you turn on the lights and you see that there's a bottle of red hair dye next to the bathtub, and you see these. You find tucked away in a couple of spots, these allusions to a ghost potentially occupying the house. You find a Ouija board and a little pentagram and a little Wiccan ritual that the two girls were attempting. And there is no ghost, right? There's no bloody body anywhere. There's no actual. There are some dark family secrets that you discover and that are alluded to, but there's no actual literal haunting going on or anything horrific happening in the present day. And so the vibe, that sort of horror vibe, is constantly subverted as you go through the house, even if this situation or setting might normally be a little scary, like you're entering the basement for the first time and you're just looking down at this dark unlit stairwell, and at least for me, I'm playing this in my room late at night in a dark room. I'm looking at this dark stairwell and I'm feeling a little bit of what I imagine the game creators wanted us to feel, which is that anxiety that this character would probably be feeling.
Yeah, that anxiety kind of runs through, and at some points even kind of makes you doubt what you think the game is at times. I mean, like, there's the bit where you turn a corner and you see the corridor towards the attic and there's all these red lights, and I think the soundtrack has this kind of haunting glow towards it, and then as soon as you step closer to the attic, you suddenly see Sam's dark room, and at the red lights are because that's where she starts developing photos that she's been taking. Yeah, it's those kind of like nice kind of twists on horror tropes and stuff. And we mentioned a couple of the characters. I think let's go a bit more in detail with the actual story and characters themselves. So yeah, so for example, it's set in June 1995, and you play Caitlin Greenbrier, who's returning home from travelling for overseas for a year or so, and coming back to the family's new home that she's never been to before. So basically, her dad, who's a failed writer who's reviewing electronics, her mum is a wildlife conservationist who's recently got promoted to quite a high position in the organisation she works for, and a 17-year-old sister, Samantha, who's referred to as Sam. She turns up at like 5 past midnight. The house is empty. There's still under the house possessions in boxes, and there is a bunch of stuff missing. And it's as Katie kind of goes through, she starts picking up pieces of what happened with her younger sister Sam. Certain objects trigger journal entries written by Sam, which are meant for Katie to be read, talking about just not fitting in this new school that she's at. But then she recently becomes making new friends, and eventually makes a friend called Lonnie. And it's then the main kind of narrative is the story of Katie's sister Sam and her growing relationship with her friend Lonnie, who eventually becomes her girlfriend, and what will eventually happen to them, which we'll talk about a bit more later on. But in parallel, you can, from just looking around and looking at stuff, there are non-voiceover triggering objects which fill out with letters, pamphlets, leaflets, all sorts of things, which help branch out the story of more about kind of Sam's life and the life and kind of storylines going through with her mum and dad. And for example, her mum is just recently promoted to director, and eventually you start to see things that suggest that she's quite bored with her marriage and starts flirting with like a subordinate. Then there's a whole thing with her dad, who's a failed writer, who is just writing reviews for hi-fi systems for a magazine, and he's a failed writer, and you just find these different books, and as you go around the house, you start to see a kind of interesting art progression throughout these. How did you find the stories of the family as you went through that?
Yeah, I like the little side stories that we get about the parents. You do have to kind of pay close attention to some of the dates and the context to clue into there being like a passage of time. Like the father especially, like you get these early on, you find these kind of rejection notices of, like, due to the sales of your second book, we won't be publishing a third, that kind of thing. And then, by the end of the game, you find new editions of the books that he already wrote, and a new manuscript for a sequel, a final book in his trilogy that he had originally planned, because his books have been rediscovered by a new publisher and have been republished, and he gets this little redemption arc, all off to the side of the main story of this game. And I liked all the little details of that. You get the little hints of her mom having, not an affair per se, but certainly a bit of a wandering eye, wandering heart, and having a bit of a flirtatious relationship with this other like park ranger Rick. And then, again, at the end of your time in the game, you find that the place where your parents are, the reason they're not home is they're off at a couples retreat to reinvigorate their marriage. So like they have their own arc that they've gone on. And I liked all those little details. I like, you can play through the whole game without finding or engaging with any of that, but the game does reward that additional exploration that you might be tempted to go on. There's lots of little details hidden in the nooks and crannies of this game.
Yeah, there's I think there's bits where it reveals, I think, that the kind of flirtation subordinate basically was basically just ended up being engaged, wanted to got a promotion, was promoted by Katie's mum, but then it was actually just so that they could afford the wedding. And you see the wedding certificate, you see the wedding invitation on the board, and he goes, "Oh, okay, marrying someone else." And yes, that's like the implication, but it's never explicitly implied. It's never explicitly mentioned, but it's very much implied. And there's quite a few other stuff as well. I think the dad's arc in terms of the books is a lot more kind of explicit, but you can kind of see. But there's a lot of fun to be had to just kind of see, how different parts of the house, this gradual arc, because it's not really a kind of game that kind of progresses and have goals, but there are certain sections of the house that are locked and you have to kind of find keys to them, which means that as much as, because you have the option of going left, downstairs, or upstairs to get upstairs, so you can so you'll get the story in a slightly different order. But there are certain parts of the arcs, particularly with the three family members that you learn about, that you have to know some of the backstory first before you get to that. And that's one of the few criticisms I've seen online about it not being a fully immersive thing, where you have to kind of get fetch quests to unlock a locker to get a key for the attic or key for the basement and stuff to get into to the east part of the house. But aside from that, it does mean that you are able to kind of investigate and craft your own kind of gaps into the story that's filling out, and it's a way of interacting with the story that's quite different to perhaps a linear game or a movie or a book. It's like an interactive fiction, but you are exploring and filling the gaps yourself. And as you are filling out the gaps and finding more information, that you get a very rewarding feeling of like accomplishment when you start to see these things come together. I mean, I didn't cry, but I generally felt really happy seeing some of the letters near the end of the game where Terence, Katie's dad, was like saying, oh, thank you ever so much, because it's like publishers, it's a very small publishing company, but they're kind of full of, you get the impression they're kind of like sci-fi geeks who found the book and was able to say, we can't do much, but would you like to have we really can't do much, but we really like it, and we can't promise anything. It'll only be a certain 1,000 copies, but do you want to yes, oh, thank you. And they seem to really like it, and he suddenly has like a really excited, I mean, okay, it's spurred me to write a third book, but I mean, I know you only reprint, but would you be happy to do this? But if you never see if the publisher publishes his third book or not, I'm assuming the one, but at least he's had the drive back to do it. And there's that letter where he seems really happy, and I was like, oh.
Yeah. I was touched by that as well. And I like how everyone's journey is essentially one of, kind of redemption and, overcoming an obstacle and, overcoming an initial, what seems like an initial, defeat or something like that. You have Sam's relationship with Lonnie where it looks like it's going to end in this bittersweet way, and then essentially they get a happy ending. Likewise, her dad's publishing career for most of this game, you're like, oh, this poor guy. And, you learn implied things about his childhood which are really dark, and, you see that his publishing career is in the shitter, and you think, oh, this poor guy. And then at the very end, you get, he gets his redemption, and the parents who, you spend most of the game thinking that their marriage is kind of dead. And at the end, you learn that they're away on a couples retreat, and maybe there's hope for them after all. I like that the game, finishes, everyone's story essentially ends on a note of hope.
Yeah. I say we'll get to a bit of the backstory a bit later on, because I found that was quite interesting how that narrative came about, actually. But the main narrative, featuring Sam, which is Katie's sister, as you're going through the game, you realise that the main character isn't really the person you're playing. It's Sam. So you get a rough idea, a very, very rough, basic two-dimensional view of who the person you're controlling is, but there's no real... They're very much a cipher, almost a blank slate. Anything that you know about the character of Katie, who you're walking around as, is in relation to comparing to the other characters. So, for example, and this is I think it's mainly used to highlight the differences between the character of Katie and the character of Sam. So you'll walk into the main room and you've got sporting trophies from Katie where she was doing long jump and relaying and getting all straight A's and everything, whereas Sam isn't, but she's more the kind of creative, kind of recluse, who struggles to make friends. One of the best examples, one of my favourite things which highlights this, is there is a couple of times you'll see randomly kind of schoolwork, and there's a sex education essay, and when you find the one that Sam did. I can't remember what grade. I don't know what grade it is, how old they're supposed to be, but it's something like, this is the progress of pregnancy, and it's just all these statements about fertilization.
I know what you mean. Yeah, it's great.
And the assignment is just to put them in the right order of basically the biological process of actually pregnancy, about what happens when sperm goes into blah blah blah, fertilization. Just put it into the right order. Now you find Katie's version, and it's all like just basically that's everything written out in the right order, completely perfect in the right way. And you find Sam's, and Sam has turned it into a World War II.
Yeah, a creative writing project.
Yeah, a creative writing project, which fits all the kind of processes of fertilization and pregnancy and the sentences are all fit into the middle of this World War II story. And it's quite funny. It's funny to read, and it highlights the difference between the two of them. Yeah, and there's a nice little red mark saying "See me" on Sam's.
Yeah, they do a lot of good world building and character building just through all of these found objects, which are all handwritten. All of these objects that you find throughout the game are handwritten, hand drawn. In the case of all the art you find, it's a really nice touch that I appreciated about this game. Like, you really feel like it just makes the game feel very personal.
Yeah, because then you see, as you're going through the kind of letters and notes that Sam shares with Lonnie, who is Sam's friend that she makes, who eventually then becomes her girlfriend, and you see the kind of like the notes being passed and like the initial kind of courtship or friendship, where like you can kind of almost read between the lines that they're almost flirting with each other, talking about Street Fighter 2 and going to see Pulp Fiction, and then going to sneak off to watch Riot Girl bands and stuff, and just getting into kind of like the grunge scene and all that, and that kind of scene and stuff, and it has a kind of that lived in feel, as you said, and also indicative of the time as well. quite interesting, which is quite interesting because one of the things that I was reading about the development was creatively the decision to set it in 1995 not only gives them a chance to say, oh, remember this nostalgic kind of push where you walk into a room and it's full of recorded stuff, recorded VHSs of TV episodes recorded off the telly, which I remember doing when I was younger. But then also the fact that it's 1995 means mobile phones aren't really in use, so no one can't just use phones, no social media. So when Katie turns up, all this is new to her. Yeah, but that also goes back into kind of like the kind of Seattle riot girl scene. So you'll see all these like fanzines that Sam, all this doing stuff, and like some excellent music band. And I'm a massive fan of the riot girl scene and riot girl music. So some of the music we'll talk about in a second. But so you have that kind of culture being built in as you see the kind of scene that Sam got into, and just feels so lived in. When I was 10 years old in 1995. So so we're the same age more or less. So there are bits of this. I mean, okay, it's perhaps slightly more towards the American experience, but how much of it did you kind of hit home for you did it feel like you was in 1995 when you was walking through the house?
Yeah, there was plenty that hit home for me. All the little VHSs and the cassettes that were laying around. You know, we did have, at least in our home, a couple of personal computers by then. So there's maybe a little bit more tech in our homes in our home in 95 than they had in theirs. But like, you know, that's just every family's going to be a little bit different. And this is also a different region of the country. So whatever. But yeah, it rang pretty true to me, at least in terms of the setting. And yeah, having it being set in an era where a text message can't resolve any of the problems of the plot. You know, you have to rely on essentially a pre-internet, pre-cell phone, even though we did technically have those in some form back then. But you're essentially operating in a world where those things don't exist yet, at least not for the character you're playing.
I think the implication though as well is that because all the VHSs and most of the high tech equipment, like the VHSs, the video players at least, have been taken. So I think the implication has been that Sam's taking a bunch of stuff to try and sell. Because I think the end. We'll get to the ending in a sec. We'll get to the ending in a bit. But I think the implication is at least that the stuff has been taken so that Sam can sell it later. But yeah. So so that I quite like how that kind of is set up within the kind of world building aspect. And of that year. So there's a lot of kind of deliberate and quite well thought out reasons for the time, the dates, why some things, going back to, which link again to the thought behind the horror tropes being used and everything. There's a lot of well thought out kind of aspects to it that just make the game click.
Definitely. I think if I have a critique, one of the things, and obviously we're talking about a game that's 9 years old, so, and it was an independent game then, but it did strike me, at least on this most recent playthrough, the house does still feel, I know that, you know, they're in the process of moving out or whatever, but, at least Sam is, but, and Katie has been gone, but it just feels a little bit emptier than I remembered on my initial playthrough. Like, there wasn't quite as much stuff as I would have expected to find in a house that was currently being occupied. At least, you know, I think, you know, I'm just kind of like looking around the apartment that I'm in right now and just like thinking about just like how much more stuff there is just everywhere. You know, and this is an entire house, and I would have expected a little bit more. There's already so much, which is so, you know, interactive and so much detail packed into this world. So it does feel I feel almost spoiled asking for more, but it did occur to me, in playing this game in 2022, what I would like to see from this game if it were coming out today is a space that feels even more lived in and detailed than the one we get.
I can kind of see that, but I think the implication is they've been there for about a year, and I think because you still get boxes full of stuff. I mean, so they've still got boxes from the old house, but I think the implication being is that it's a much bigger house than they lived in, because they are pretty much in what people refer to as a mansion, more or less, or it's massive. It's a bigger house than perhaps can fit three people, and the implication for me is that they pretty much kind of separate across all these different parts of the house, so they don't really interact. All the families kind of growing apart, and that's probably kind of neglected the lived-in feel. So they're kind of in their own bubbles, more or less.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's plausible. It just struck me as, I don't necessarily need it full of stuff, but it just felt a little too empty this time around.
No, I can see that. I do think there's probably a kind of in-universe explanation for it. But again, it might just be a case that because of development.
Yeah, I get it.
Unless they do a HD remaster. HD remastering is too much stuff. Like, you'll spend 3 hours just picking up every single thing you can get in the drawing room. Or like, you can pull out every single vinyl record in the...
Yeah, there you go. Every record is playable now.
Yes. But there are things that can be seen and found out that you'll miss. So we've talked about the kind of like the stuff with like the mum and the dad and stuff. But then there's also like various stuff to do with the uncle, because I think it's the uncle of the dad, Terence or Terry.
Yes.
Uncle Oscar, yeah. Now it's his mansion, and it's referred to as the Psycho House, and so the implication being that he just lived alone all his life, more or less, and I can't remember if the cause of death was revealed, or I can't remember if it was revealed how he died, or I can't remember, or when he died, actually. I can't remember that bit. Yeah, so there's that sort of kind of Psycho House stuff, and that's one of the reasons I think Sam gets kind of ostracised by her peers early on, that she says that she lives in so-and-so, and then the kids at school start saying, "Ooh, you're the Psycho House girl," and which immediately kind of makes her a pariah in the new people, with a new in a new school. But I think what's quite interesting is that when you start to read more into Terry's background, is that you see kind of letters from Terry's dad, and his dad's very standoffish or very critical of his work and stuff. And there's like a letter about his first book that he wrote. It goes, "Oh, I can see that people who like sci-fi might enjoy this, but you can do better." And that's a letter from his dad.
That's another great example of like the little touches of backstory that we get about this dad. That letter from his dad, you have to imagine that he's been hearing some version of that kind of tone from his dad his entire life.
But yeah, and then I think young Terry then like kind of hung out with his cool Uncle Oscar in the big mansion, and there's a safe. I think there's a safe in the basement, and if you unlock it, there is a letter, I think, I can't remember who to, but it's written by Oscar, talking about a transgression that happened in 1963. And the implication being, looking at the fact that Terry has been writing novels about going back in time to 1963 to change, like, to reverse the assassination of JFK. The implication being is that there has been abuse. Yeah. I'm not going to go too much into detail because I don't know, I can't speak on that kind of topic that much, but the kind of implication being is that a lot of Terry has a lot of kind of issues based on that throughout, and it's kind of slightly exacerbated. And yeah, that word, yeah, since moving back in, there's a kind of unused hi-fi review where he starts talking about his childhood and starts rambling
Right.
whilst he's supposed to be reviewing a hi-fi and stuff. So you can kind of see he's kind of trying to deal with it. But one of the things that I kind of remember from that is when the game first come out, is that bit was never kind of explicitly mentioned until someone, I think on a forum or on Steam, I can't remember what exactly, someone was saying, oh, hang on, is there something happening with Oscar? And I remember one of the developers replying going, maybe. And
Right.
and there's like online threads of like people looking further into it and looking into and talking about what they think's been happening with Oscar in the story. And you can just see the developers just going, oh, okay, replying to this thread going, yeah, maybe. And so like in real time, the internet kind of working out this subplot, and like the developers just kind of feeling a bit of pride that people are actually looking into that kind of depth into it. And that's always stuck in my head for some reason. It's an example of the further kind of world and exploration of these characters that you can do that you will miss in the game. I mean, on a first playthrough, if you're sat down looking through it, you will probably go through and get the mom dad storyline. But then if you're scouring down and making the effort to try and find the combination to that safe, it's about an extra hour's worth of exploration to clean out the dots. Again, it's very rewarding when you start putting the pieces together.
Yeah, and you find other, I don't know exactly, like you said, how Oscar dies, but other things you find in the safe include intravenous drugs and a bit of rubber hose that he might have used to tie off his arm, as well as a syringe. The implication is that either he's ill or was ill, or maybe he ended his own life.
Yeah, and it's just it's just like something that's adds a bit more kind of reality to proceedings and stuff. And again, kind of just the fact that you can kind of, if you just devote the time to look further into this stuff, it's very rewarding to just get that. The effort that you put in is rewarded with just like further exploration of this kind of world that you're in. So yeah, have we got anything else about the Oscar subplot before we move back to the ending?
No.
I think as we go back to the ending, we've got the story of Sam and her girlfriend Lonnie. Now, what's one of the things that happens throughout the game, particularly around the kind of the mid to end point, is that when you start to see more about the Sam and Lonnie relationship, you can kind of see Sam kind of reacting to and getting to know Lonnie more. Lonnie's an interesting character as well. So she draws Sam into this kind of feminist right girl movement, anti-establishment kind of scene of like music and all that kind of era of let's say settled grunge music scene. But she's also a JROTC cadet, which I did look up, but I'm not 100% sure what that is again. It's
so that's a junior. Oh, well, you looked it up, so.
So the JROTC is the Junior Reserves Officers Training Corps, which I think, from what I've briefly read, is I think it's perhaps teenagers who perhaps want to go into the armed forces when they graduate. Is that like a?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
That's the idea. It's like a little bit of a. It's almost like a bit of a prep. Not quite school, but a prep program for eventually becoming an officer in the armed forces. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's one of the journal entries. Sam kind of questions like that. Lonnie is very anti-establishment and kind of like almost like rebellious socialist. But then when she's like a prim and proper kind of follow the rules when she's at a training corps and doing her military drills and stuff. But the kind of like conflict between Sam and Lonnie is the fact that she's been shipped off. I think she's graduating and then leaving to be shipped off somewhere. I don't fully understand what I'm assuming, just shipping overseas for something. And then that it's like the kind of you then start getting the kind of typical kind of emo teenager journal entries. And now this is the part of my playthrough. This is the part of the playthrough that started to unsettle me a bit, because the music starts to get more somber, and the language that Sam uses is quite dark.
Yeah.
And I got the attic key, and
Yep.
I remember walking towards the attic, saving the game.
Am I going to find a body up there?
Yeah, closing the game, and then going to reread a couple of reviews just to make sure that they said it was a hole. Because I was there going like, because I didn't want to spoil it, but I had to turn the game off and start reading reviews just to make sure that it wasn't actually a horror and there wasn't a twist ending.
Yeah.
Because I was generally about to think that there was going to be a double suicide upstairs.
Yeah, right. I had forgotten that until this latest playthrough. Similar. I was like, wait. Oh, well, I mean, I obviously knew the second time through that I wasn't going to find it up there, but I was brought back to my first playthrough, and that feeling, sort of what I mentioned earlier when I was talking about looking down the stairwell, that feeling of dread that you get of like, oh no, this is the mid '90s, and these are queer teens, and they're facing adversity, and the music's changed, and like the parents are out of town. Like, is this going to be a sad ending? Very relieved that wasn't the case.
Yes, yeah, but I generally had to turn the game off and make sure that there wasn't a twist ending. I was 95% sure it was going to be fine, but there was just so uneasy. And again, going back to our conversation about the horror tropes, the way it kind of the way it kind of built up. But again, what it's doing though is subverting that. So there's I think is it the kill your gays trope that's been thrown about, where the amount of kind of gay or queer characters in fiction that have been killed off.
Yep.
Ridiculously immense. And I think the game actually subverts that with the kind of like a last minute twist, because you're walking up to the dark room, the lights are going, the bass and the music starting to kick in, and then you go into the dark room, you hear Sam getting kind of really emotional, and then you see kind of like the pictures of the hands and the eyes developing in the dark room.
Yeah.
And then you just go, oh my god, she said yes, she was coming back. And then, which then goes back, if you play the answer phone message, the answer machine, if you play the answer machine in the hallway, you get, I think, 3 messages. You get one from a friend of the mom, you get Katie's message that you hear at the start, and you get this girl kind of crying and saying, sorry Sam. And again, without much context. And then you hear it from Sam's point of view, saying that she's pretty much jumped off the bus and saying, let's run away. So they get in the car and run away. So they're running off together. And
the twist is that it's a happy ending.
Yeah, and like saying like, oh yeah, we're both alive, it's happy ending, we're together. And yeah, but also, sorry, you probably won't see me for a long while. Please tell you're going to have to deal with mom and dad when they come back.
Right.
To a house ransacked.
Yep.
But so there's that moment of uplifting stuff, and he kind of almost bittersweet, uplifting, kind of like, oh okay, so they're not dead, and the game kind of ends with a kind of twist on that horror ending. Oh okay, so it's a teen drama love story with a kind of almost happy ending to it, and again it's kind of like you feel the heart palpitations kind of stop, thinking, oh, okay, they're not dead.
Right.
There's no ghost. And it kind of feels nice, and you just feel like, and when I finished it was like 11:30 at night, I felt like, wow, what have I just experienced?
Sure.
So yeah, I'm assuming that's the same kind of thing for you when you finished as well.
It was impactful. I definitely remember, it was a very memorable experience. I think the fact that it's so short could be seen as a shortcoming. I think if given the choice, I always prefer a shorter experience that's great to a mediocre, longer experience. But I wouldn't have minded if it was a little bit longer, especially given the quality of this game. But but the advantage of it being as short as it is that you can just sort of sit down and finish it all in one sitting and just have this complete moving experience rather than breaking it up over 2 sessions or 3.
Yeah, I mean, I often see it as like a film or a book that you can see in one thing. You sit down and go for this interactive experience. Would you argue it's a game?
It's Yeah, it's closer to a playable novel in terms of the the conventions of how it's of how the story unfolds. You know, the story unfolds in a pretty linear way. They certainly use gameplay tropes, and gameplay devices to, you mentioned finding certain combinations so that you can unlock certain locks and get a key that's for some reason inside that locked thing, and you can unlock something else. And there's certainly a lot of game mechanics. Yeah, it's on the cusp. I don't say that as a criticism. Like, I don't think everything has to be a quote unquote game in order for it to be a meaningful and worthwhile experience. I think some people miss that when they have these conversations. I don't know. How do you feel about it?
I don't think it's a game either, but I don't mean that in a derogatory sense either. I think I've always seen it as kind of like an interactive kind of story, or as said in the Wikipedia article at the start of it, it's seen as game as being art, or it's just another way of interacting or going through a story. So it's kind of like a different medium. So it's not exactly a choose your own adventure book. There's a couple of very loose game mechanics in there. A couple of times where you can't progress to a certain point without finding certain keys to get in. But then again, though, once you know where the key to the celery or the panel to get into the seance thing, you can go in, grab the attic key, and then you finish the game in about a minute.
Right.
But you only know that you won't know that on your first playthrough. But aside from that, I do think that it's a different kind of storytelling medium. Probably less than a game. There's no competitive element to it. But yeah, it's an interesting
debate. There's only one story. Like, it's there isn't an alternative path to get to the. There's no way to alter this story. It's telling this one story, and you are on more or less on kind of a track through the game. You can explore things at your own pace, which is one of the things that I think is a huge strength of this game. But there are areas that are blocked off and can't progress until you've found the object that you need to find in this one area, and then you can get to the next area. It's pretty linear in terms of the narrative, how it unfolds. There's not really any variation. The replay value isn't extremely high. This was only my second time playing it. I had a very memorable, positive first time playing it 9 years ago, but it was never a game that I felt like I needed to revisit until a good enough time had passed that I had forgotten enough details, that it was like, that there was enough discovery to make it a positive experience to play through again. But it's not a game like some other games where I would sit down and maybe start it up again and have a completely different experience, like if I was playing a role-playing game or something.
Mm-hmm. How was the second playthrough then? What did you...
I mean, it was good. It was like, I don't want to say it was like playing it for the first time, because I still remembered enough, sort of broad strokes, but 9 years have passed, so I'd forgotten a lot of little details that were a delight to rediscover. And, I didn't remember where all like the hidden panels were or anything like that. But, to your point that you were making earlier about how if you do know where those things are, you can get through the game a lot faster. Like, yeah, if I had sat back down with the game immediately after finishing it the first time, it probably would not have been anywhere close to as enjoyable as it was playing it 9 years later.
I reckon it's just like picking up a book or watching a film you haven't seen for a while, like for 10 years or something. It's like when I went to go and rewatch Lost for the first time since it aired and stuff. There's a lot I remember, but then there's a bunch of stuff I've forgotten, and it was just like quite enriching to revisit and go, oh yeah, there's little bits that I can remember. A couple of other things before we move on. There is a mode for a director's commentary or a team commentary, which I remember going through.
I did go through that. Yeah.
I can't remember much from it, but the one thing that I've always remembered is that I think one of the art designers talking about you find a book, and when you go over it, you see a little. Usually, you just see the name of the item, but sometimes you'll get Katie's thoughts on it.
Yes.
And there's one saying, gross, and it's an intimacy book for older couples.
Yes. Yes.
And what I really like is that I think one of the designers was saying that she wanted to make sure she thought it was going to be uncomfortable for Katie, but she had to make it uncomfortable. So she actually put a picture of her own parents on the book.
Oh, that's funny. I like that.
Yeah. So she had to commit to the bit more or less.
Yeah, totally. There's another little scrap of paper that you can find that is Sam's writing about I think it's the first time, or at least it's about a time that she and Lonnie were intimate, and you like just about the point where you, the player, get to realize that that's what this note is detailing. Katie puts it back away and refuses to let you pick it back up. She's like, nope, no way, never looking at that again. It's so funny.
It's one of the few times where you kind of, it's funny, but it's also one of the few times you remember that you're actually playing a character. You got the character without those feelings again, but then Katie's not really. We're meant to be Katie, so you're not really meant to have an arc for her as well. But it's one of those things where it's like, no, okay, yeah, this is still your sister.
Yeah, Katie's drawing the line for you.
Yeah. There's also talking about the horror tropes. There's actually also from the commentary one bit that they deliberately scripted. So if you're in I think it's the seance room. You're in one of the hidden stairwells. There's a cross that you can pick up. As soon as you pick it up, a light bulb goes off. A bulb explodes.
Huh.
And that's the only kind of horror-ish kind of scripted event that happens. And it says like they tried to fit at least one in. So, Gone Home, the reception, very positive reviews. The Game Journalist, it's got an 86 out of 100 score on Metacritic based on 56 critic reviews. Adventure Gamers, 4.5 out of 5. Edge, 9 out of 10. Gaming Format, 8.5. GameSpot, 9.5. Giant Bomb, 5 out of 5. IGN gave it 9.5 out of 10. Polygon, 10 out of 10. Financial Post, 10 out of 10. Daily Telegraph, 4 out of 5. Eurogamer gave it 6 out of 10, which is, I think it's like the outlier in terms of reviews and stuff.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Also won quite a few awards. It was nominated for a few, but it's one of the biggest awards it's won. I think it won the Game of the Year for Polygon, but it also won a BAFTA. It won the BAFTA for the best debut game in 2013. So, and BAFTA being the British Academy Games Awards. So that's pretty kind of high profile as well. So it got well received for its innovation in terms of storytelling. It kind of got praise for its discussion of the LGBT. It got praise for its issues to do with the LGBT themes in the game as well. So yeah, it had some knockback from people saying like, "Oh, it's just a boring love story," or across the board, very, 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 very well praised. I asked on social media if anyone's got any thoughts and feelings or memories to do with the game. We've had a couple of submissions.
Oh, great.
Colin Jackson Brown, who's one of our fellow We Made This hosts. He hosts Free With This Month's issue and We Dig Music. He said, "Love Gone Home, one of the first walking sim games I ever played. It was a massive change from the wandering around shooting stuff RPGs that I've been playing like Fallout. Really enjoyed the mid-90s setting, and the cassette slotted around with Bratmobile and Heavens to Betsy tracks on them made it even better. Yeah, I love the music in this."
Yeah, we didn't talk as much about that, but the music is good, and it's a nice touch, like when you find the occasional cassette tape and you find a cassette player. There's a few scattered through the house to pop it in, and then the music blasts. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, and I quite like the sound design because like as you walk, the further you walk away, it does get quieter and quieter. And then,
Yep.
Yeah, I mean those tapes last forever though for some reason. Like you can walk away and then come back into the room and it's
pretty funny.
Yeah, but yeah, Batmobile, Hepton and Betsy. I listened to the albums of them before we earlier today in the lead up to this, and quite a few bands that I like now, some of my favourite bands, influenced by the Riot Girl movement. In fact, a couple of song lyrics from one of my favourite bands kind of reference some of the song titles for Heavens for Betsy. But I was like, oh wow, okay, I finally understand my favourite bands a bit better now. And the other one we had was from Saoirse Dunbar, who is the host of one of our rivals, the Adventure Games podcast. But no, the Adventure Games podcast has been around for years, and I fully recommend go and listen to them. They do a lot more of the news stories and interviews with developers. So if you want to keep appraised on current adventure games being released, the Adventure Games podcast is great, and Saoirse's been quite supportive of the podcast on Twitter as well. So thank you for that. He goes, myself, Thomas, and Laura, who are the hosts of the Adventure Games podcast, played this at the same time remotely and really enjoyed it. I especially love throwing objects around, very atmospheric and creepy, and it was nice to be able to relax and explore the house. Would definitely recommend. It's be an interesting communal experience if you're playing this for the first time. Because I pretty much played it on my own. I'm assuming that you played it on your own as well when you first played it.
I mean, I did. I had, I had a good friend of mine, actually, Tim, my co-host on The Way, our Star Wars podcast. He and I both are big gamers, and we played this around the same time. I can't remember which one of us played it first, but we both played it right around the same time and, talked to each other about it. It was a bit of a communal experience in terms of talking to my fellow gamers about it when it was out at the time and how much we liked it.
Okay, yeah. Actually, that is probably is kind of like a communal game because it's not much of a gaming thing, so you can probably just have one person wandering around, and you can have people watching you as well and all playing just so as you're learning the story. So. Yeah, it could be a game that gets remastered. I could see this game getting remastered for VR as another way of adding a level of immersion to this kind of storytelling. So, but yeah, thank you, Colin and Saoirse, for your submissions. Future episodes, I'm going to keep an eye on our social medias because I'll be asking for further submissions on stuff for future episodes that I definitely will be doing and won't be taking 2 years to do again. So yeah, and before we sign off, Ian, is there anything you want to bring up that we might have missed? Is there anything that you want to talk about that we've somehow missed?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. Was this was, with the exception of a couple of Half-Life mods like Dear Esther or the Stanley Parable, like this was my first walking simulator style adventure game. Was this your first adventure game in this kind of style? Yeah, definitely. I think it was one of the first. I think Dear Esther surpasses it, I think, as a separate game. I think I don't know if there's many before this, but I think this is probably the one that might kind of made the genre bigger or more accessible or more well known. That sounds about right. I think Dear Esther was a little bit... Well, I know Dear Esther was a little bit before this, and for me was my first experience with that kind of game. Yeah, I've not played Dear Esther, actually. I keep meaning to, just to kind of bridge the gap, I think. But no, I think, this got me... I think this kind of got me a lot more into them. I think stuff like Stanley Parable, which I definitely will going to do at some point on this podcast. I think The Beginner's Guide, I remember being as one as well. Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which I have conflicting feelings about. Yeah, but I think I do quite like the walking sim kind of genre that was developed from this or made. Yeah, me too. And this, so I like them as a storytelling device. So with that, Ian, I think we've reached the end of our chat and we finally finished the latest episode of Ask Us About Loom. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I definitely did. I can't wait to come back and chat other adventure games with you.
Yeah, I look forward to coming back as well. It's been great. I can't wait to have you back on and to see where this odyssey through the adventure gaming genre takes us. So, if people want to find you online, where can they find you?
So I'm not really much on the social media, but you can hear me other places on the We Made This network. I mentioned The Way, our Star Wars podcast. We've also mentioned Illumination Above All, our Severance podcast that I do with Tony. That's going to be coming back next month. Just a few weeks until we record some more episodes of that. I also pop up on our Star Trek podcasts. We Are Starfleet, Make It So, Rarely Going, as well as the occasional appearance on Podcast 616, including one with you, Matt, and our friend Craig, where we talked about Spider-Man 2, and that should just about cover it. I think that's just about everything. Oh, I also do movieversaries fairly frequently with Bo Nicholson.
If anyone listening is also aware of the Pick a Disc, which is my other podcast, then hopefully they'll be aware of the We Made This podcast network. Feel free to have a look around. There'll be something for everyone, possibly. So if you want to find me, you can find me on the internet under Pick a Disc, which is my other podcast where I talk to people about music. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can find me there. You can find the podcast under Ask Us About Loom, or one word, no spaces, on Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to add any comments about this, that things we might not have missed about Gone Home, feel free to email us at askusaboutloom@gmail.com. And I'm going to say that if people want to add their comments onto games that we talk about, please feel free. I probably do envision perhaps one day having like a mailbag episode, depending on how much we get, to perhaps catch on reactions to episodes. If people want to submit stuff and thoughts as well, I will be up for doing a mailbag episode. So feel free to contact us and email us about thoughts on that. So other than that, I think that is it. I can't think of anything else to add now. So, Ian, thank you ever so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. And again, Ask Us About Loom is part of the We Made This podcast network. Please stay tuned a second just to have a trailer suddenly appear once we stop talking. But thank you ever so much for listening. It will not be 2 years until the next episode, I will guarantee. Until next time, we'll see each other again someday. Don't be worried. I love you.
Do you believe in the existence of X-Files podcasts? Then the truth is in here. I'm Tony.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Carl.
And I'm R. Moldrake.
And the X-Cast is devoted to all things X-Files, such as in-depth episode discussions.
I love the 8th season being like, no, you're saying goodbye. And that's something pop culture doesn't do enough.
Interviews with many of the cast and crew from the show.
I had to audition repeatedly. I mean, I went in, I read for Chris and Frank. First I read for the casting director, Rick. And then I made it past that hurdle and read for Chris and Frank. Had a lovely meeting with them.
And special roundtable chats, commentaries, and fun bonus episodes.
But this is great. Mulder just having no idea what's going on.
On this beautiful boat with people not really speaking English.
You can find us on the We Made This podcast network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all good podcast players.
We'll see you in the basement. But until then,
trust
no
one.